Colorado Territory, July 1882, the baby kicked hard as the train rattled east through the foothills, and Kienna Voss pressed a hand to her stomach, heart pounding louder than the wheels. She did not look back. Not at the station, not at the mountain town she had escaped. Her parents' voices still rang in her ears. "You will give up that child, Kienna, do you hear me? That boy has already ruined your life once. You do not let him ruin it again." But she had not listened. She had waited until midnight, packed the baby's clothes, the silver rattle her grandmother had given her, and the small pouch of coins she had been hiding behind the loose board under her bed. Then she met Tobias behind the stables like they planned. He had grabbed her hand while the moon lit the frost on the grass. "We'll be gone before they even know," he had said. But Tobias had not made it past the first town. By sunrise he was gone, left her with nothing but a shaking hand and a letter scribbled on the back of a newspaper. "You'll be better off without me. I can't do this. I'm sorry." Now, Kienna sat alone in a worn seat car, her belly heavy with the life he had helped create. The railroad stretched east, but she no longer knew where she was going. The baby kicked again, and she gritted her teeth, staring out at the endless gray-green fields. She had fled with him. She had chosen her child. That much she knew, but she could not go back. Snow was still on the peaks when the train jolted to a stop outside a place called Bitterweed, a half-built town with more dust than roads and a single street lined with false front buildings. She stepped off with her carpet bag, heart thudding as she looked around. There were no women in sight. Just miners, ranch hands, and a few young boys hauling water. "Need help, miss?" a voice called. Kienna turned. A tall man, sun-browned skin, rough hands, and a thick canvas coat stood beside a saddled roan tied to the post. He looked to be about 30, maybe older, with deep lines around his eyes and a quiet steadiness in how he stood. She hesitated. "I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, so I just need enough coin for a room." The man nodded, eyes dipping briefly to her belly but not in judgment. "Name's Rowan Lattimer. I run cattle west of town. House is a ride out. You do not mind dust and long days. I could use help." Kienna's breath caught. "I will work hard, I promise." Rowan nodded once. "Come on then." The ride was quiet. He did not ask questions. She did not offer explanations. The cabin stood low against a rise, made from thick pine, with a porch covered in drying herbs and a single rocking chair. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and leather. There was a cradle in the corner, handmade but empty. Rowan watched her glance at it. "It was for my sister's boy. She passed 2 winters back. I kept it in case." "In case?" Kienna asked softly. "In case someone needed it." She blinked hard and nodded. "Thank you." That night she lay on a cot near the hearth, the fire crackling low. Rowan had given her a blanket, a bowl of stew, and silence. Not once had he asked where she came from or why she looked like a girl chased by ghosts. Weeks passed. Kienna worked and the land worked her back. She scrubbed floors, mended shirts, hauled water from the creek. Rowan fixed fence posts, rode out before dawn, came back with dust in his collar and quiet in his eyes. He never asked about Tobias. He never asked about the baby's father at all. Instead, he carved a cradle rocker for the old crib. "You should not be doing all that alone," he said one morning, handing her a stool for her aching feet. "You need rest." She looked up. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. She wanted to ask what that meant, but she saw it in how his eyes softened when she spoke, how he left extra blankets by her cot before the nights turned cold. He never touched her, never crossed lines. He just stayed close enough to feel safe. Then the baby came. A storm broke over the hills the night her labor started. Rain pounded the roof, wind howling through the trees. Kienna gripped the edge of the table, pain shooting through her spine. Rowan was there before she called out. He moved fast, steady. He lit the lamps, boiled water, pressed a cloth to her brow. "You are not alone," he said. It took hours. She screamed into the storm, biting down until her voice was raw. And finally, just before dawn, a cry broke through the cabin. A boy. Tiny fingers. A full head of dark hair. Tears streamed down her face as she held him. "Talon," she whispered. "His name is Talon." Rowan did not speak. He just looked at the child like he had never seen anything more sacred. 3 days later, Kienna found Rowan outside by the fence, hammer in hand. She wrapped a blanket tight against the wind and walked to him. "You saved me," she said. He looked over. "No, you did." Her voice cracked. "I was running. I had nowhere to go. No one." Rowan rested the hammer on the beam. "You are not running anymore." He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers, and for the first time she felt something shift between them, something warm. "I never thought I could feel safe again," she whispered. "You are safe now," he said. And then he reached out slow, careful, and brushed her hair back from her cheek. She leaned into his hand, eyes closing. Neither of them spoke. But something had started that could not be undone. By mid-August, the fields had yellowed under the sun, and the wind carried the dry hush of grass gone brittle. Rowan had taken to checking the fence lines each morning before the heat settled. Kienna stood on the porch most days with Talon nestled against her chest, watching the ridgeline until Rowan's shape crested over it again. She never said she was waiting, but her eyes always found him first. Talon had grown heavier in her arms. His legs kicked now, strong and restless, and he'd started making sounds like he was trying to talk to the wind. Kienna often whispered back to him, stories she made up on the spot, her voice low and steady while she worked her needle or fed the hens. One afternoon, Rowan returned with a tear at the shoulder of his shirt and blood dried at the edge of his collarbone. "What happened?" Kienna asked, already moving toward him. "Bull caught me wrong, got between me and the gate." He winced as he swung down from the saddle. "Didn't quite move fast enough." She reached up, fingers already tugging at the buttons. "Come inside, that needs to be cleaned." "I can do it. You're not doing it one-handed," she said, already leading him inside. She boiled water, crushed yarrow with the flat of a spoon, and tore a strip from an old flour sack. Talon slept in the cradle, his breath soft, and even while Kienna worked, Rowan sat still on the stool while she pressed the poultice to the wound. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. She looked up from her task. "Leaving where?" "Here. This place. Starting somewhere else. Someplace quieter." She didn't answer right away. Her hands moved slow, binding the cloth tight. "I used to think I'd live in a stone house in St. Louis with lace curtains and a piano. I don't know if I ever really wanted that or if it was just what I was told to want. And now I want a place where no one can take him from me. That's all." Rowan nodded. "That's fair." She rinsed her hands, then sat across from him. The fire cracked between them, and the silence stretched long but not uneasy. "I've been thinking about building a second room," he said after a while. "Something with more light, maybe a window that faces the east." Kienna turned her head. "You want help with the framing?" His mouth twitched into something close to a smile. "I wouldn't mind." The next morning, she woke to the smell of sawdust and pine. Rowan had already cleared the ground beside the house, and by the time Talon had nursed and settled back to sleep, she was handing him nails while he cut the beams. They worked in tandem, passing tools and holding boards steady, the rhythm of their labor settling into something easy. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she stood in the new frame and looked out where the window would be. "You ever lose anyone?" she asked, not turning. Rowan leaned against the post beside her. "My father, when I was 19. He died out near the Cimarron helping a neighbor drive cattle, never came home. She nodded. I lost my sister. She drowned when we were children. After that, I think my parents never let me breathe without them watching. They thought they were keeping you safe. They were keeping me small. He didn't answer, but after a while she felt his hand brush lightly against hers along the beam. She didn't pull away. Later that night, Kienna stepped out into the cool air while Talon slept. The stars were thick as spilled salt across the sky. Rowan sat by the barn sharpening a blade, and she walked to him barefoot, arms crossed against the chill. "I've been thinking," she said. He set the blade aside. "You gave me space when I needed it. You didn't ask for anything, but I want you to know I see what you've done." "You don't owe me anything, Kienna," she shook her head. "It's not about owing, I don't want to be afraid anymore." Rowan stood, close enough now that she could see the faint scar at his jawline. "You don't have to be," he said. And then, with a quiet that felt like the wind shifting through cottonwood, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't hurried. It didn't need to be. When she stepped back, he looked at her like she was something he hadn't dared hope for. "Are you sure? I wouldn't have kissed you if I wasn't." He nodded once, and his hand found hers in the dark. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The wind moved softly through the grass, and the house behind them held the sound of their son breathing. A home was being built, one board at a time. Not just with pine and hammer, but with every small trust laid down between them. And for the first time in her life, Kienna Voss didn't feel like she was running from anything. She was finally choosing something, someone, and he was choosing her back. September settled in slow and dry. The heat gave way to wind that scraped the grass flat and carried dust in low spirals across the yard. The walls of the new room stood framed and solid, and Rowan had begun shaping the window trim with a draw knife. His sleeves rolled and sawdust clinging to his forearms. Kienna had taken to tending the garden near the porch, coaxing cabbage and late carrots from the soil with careful hands. Talon lay swaddled in a basket beside her, eyes tracking the clouds above like he knew something of the world already. One afternoon, Rowan came back from town with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. He set it on the table without a word and went to fetch kindling. She untied the string and unfolded a pair of tiny leather boots, soft-soled and hand-stitched, no larger than her palm. Her fingers brushed the seams, and for a long moment she didn't move. "I saw them at the mercantile," Rowan said from the doorway. "Thought maybe he'd need them come October." She looked up, her throat tight. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." She rose and crossed the room, the boots still in her hands. "You think about him like he's yours." Rowan studied her face before he spoke. "I don't know what he'll come to call me, that's for him to decide, but I think about him because he matters. To you." "To me," she stepped closer. "He doesn't have anyone else. He has you," Rowan said. "And if you'll let me, he'll have me too." Outside, the wind rattled the loose shutter on the shed, but neither of them moved. Talon stirred in his basket, a soft sound like a sigh. Kienna touched Rowan's arm. "You've never asked about the man who left." "I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me," she nodded. "He was kind when we were secret, but when it came time to do the hard part, he folded, left me a note. I haven't spoken his name since." "He gave up something good," Rowan said. "I don't regret what I chose, just that I ever thought he'd stay." Rowan's hand settled over hers, steady and warm. "You don't have to carry that alone anymore." That evening, Kienna lit a lantern and read aloud from a tattered book of folk tales while Rowan carved a shelf for the new room. Talon lay on a quilt beside her, eyes half-lidded, lulled by the sound of her voice. "You ever think about your mother?" she asked between pages. "Sometimes. She died when I was small. I remember her singing when she'd stir lye soap and how she'd braid my sister's hair." "Not much else." "She must have been strong," Kienna said. "She was tired," Rowan replied, But she kept going. Kienna folded the book closed. I think about how I'll teach him what kind of mother I'll be. I don't want to pass down fear. You won't, Rowan said. You already don't. She watched him fit the shelf into place, his hands sure and quiet. You believe in things most men wouldn't. I believe in what I see. You didn't run to escape shame. You ran to protect him. There's not a stronger reason in the world than that. Later, once the fire had burned down, she stood beside Talon's cradle, smoothing the blanket over his chest. Rowan stepped in from the porch, the scent of the evening air still clinging to his coat. I think I'm ready, she said. For what? To stop waiting for something to go wrong. He came to her side. Then let's build a life where it doesn't have to. She turned to him, her voice low. Not just you taking us in. I want a life with you if that's what you want too. It is, he said without pause. She rested her head against his shoulder, the quiet between them full and certain. In the weeks that followed, they added shutters to the new room, planted apple saplings by the fence line, and began saving for a second milk cow. The porch filled with drying herbs again, and Talon's laughter echoed beneath the rafters. When the first frost came, Rowan whittled a small horse from juniper and left it on the cradle rail. Kienna found it in the morning, its tiny hooves smooth from his careful carving. She held it in her hand a long time, then turned to where Rowan stood by the stove. We'll teach him everything that matters, she said. Rowan met her eyes. Together. And they did. October brought the smell of wood smoke on the wind and thinned the maple leaves to a pale gold. Kienna stood by the small wash basin, wringing out Talon's blanket, her sleeves pushed to her elbows and her eyes on the low hills beyond the window. Rowan had taken the wagon to the neighboring ranch that morning, hauling fence wire and a crate of salted pork. He wouldn't be back until after sundown. Talon cooed from his crib, his hands batting at the air. He was shaping sounds now, his mouth working with purpose. She dried her hands and leaned over him, brushing a kiss across his brow. You're going to talk before you walk, she whispered. Just like your grandfather. She hadn't spoken that name aloud in weeks. Perhaps she never would again. That afternoon, she brought in the last of the onions and stacked them in the root cellar. The ground was hardening, and the hens had begun laying less. Winter would come quiet and sharp, like it always did. By the time Rowan returned, the sky was already dim. He stepped down from the wagon stiffly, his left boot dragging slightly. You limping? Kienna asked, lighting the lantern as he washed at the basin. Wheel caught a low rut on the slope near the creek, sprung the axle. I jumped down too fast. She handed him a dry towel. You should have waited for help. No one out there but old Harlan, and he's slower than the wagon. She raised an eyebrow. That your way of saying you're still young enough to be foolish, he chuckled low. Something like that. Later, after Talon had settled, they sat near the hearth. Kienna stitched a patch on one of Rowan's shirts, and he rubbed liniment over his calf, jaw tight. You ever think about marrying again? She asked without looking up. I never did the first time. She paused in her stitching. I thought maybe you had. I was too tied up in running cattle, fixing what broke after my pa died. Didn't have time to think about anything else for a long while. You have time now. He looked at her carefully. Is that your way of saying you want me to ask? I'm saying I wouldn't walk away if you did. He set the tin of liniment down. I don't want to ask just to ease things. I'd ask because I want to wake beside you every morning, raise him with your steadiness, build something that doesn't crack when the wind blows wrong. She folded the shirt and set it aside. Then ask. He stood slowly, favoring his leg, and crossed the room. His hand reached for hers, warm and rough. Kienna Voss, will you marry me? She looked up at him, her eyes steady. Yes. No tears, no trembling, just truth spoken plain between them. The next day they rode into town together. Talon stayed with the pastor's wife, a woman with 6 children of her own and a voice like crushed velvet. Kienna wore her hair braided low and borrowed a shawl from the woman who'd helped her birth Talon. Rowan wore his cleanest shirt, the one with the patch at the elbow that she'd stitched the night before. They stood in the parlor of the church with the wooden cross behind them and a Bible older than both their lives. The pastor's voice was quiet but sure. Kienna's hand stayed in Rowan's the whole time. When it was done, they stepped out onto the porch, the light catching the dust in the air. Rowan turned to her and brushed his thumb along her jaw. "You sure you're not dreaming all this? If I am, don't wake me." They rode home slow, taking the long trail along the ridge. The sun hung low, and the shadows stretched across the grass like reaching arms. Talon gurgled from his basket as if he'd sensed the change in the air. That night, Rowan moved his bed to the new room. Kienna laid Talon in the cradle against the far wall and climbed beneath the quilt beside the man she had chosen, the man who had never once asked her to be anything but as she was. The wind picked up outside, tugging at the eaves, but inside the cabin, everything held firm. She did not feel afraid. She felt home. The first snow came early that year, fine and dry, riding the wind like sifted flour across the ridge. It didn't settle, only dusted the porch and clung to the corners of the window panes. Kienna stood at the hearth, turning a pot of cornmeal mush with one hand, Talon balanced on her hip. He was heavier now, his legs strong enough to push against her side, his eyes quick and watchful. Rowan came in brushing snow from his shoulders, the collar of his coat stiff with cold. He leaned his gloves on the stove edge, rubbing his hands together before he reached for Talon. "I stopped by the post shack," he said, lifting the boy like he was made of something rare. "Got a letter from your cousin back east. Name was on the corner." Kienna frowned. "I haven't heard from Clara since I left. What would she write now for?" Rowan passed the folded paper across the table. "Only one way to know." She read it while the mush thickened. Clara's penmanship was sharp, confident as ever. She wrote of the family, of her upcoming marriage to a banker's son, and of how the Voss name had settled back into polite society after Kienna's departure. At the end, there was a single line that made her pause. "You were braver than any of us knew." Kienna set the letter down. "She's not asking me to come back, just wanted me to know she sees it clearer now." Rowan nodded. "You want to write her, maybe someday, when there's something to say." Outside, the snow had stopped. Rowan opened the front door and looked out at the quiet yard. Creek starting to freeze at the edges. "Ought to bring in extra wood tomorrow." "I can help split," she said, wiping her hands. "You're better with the draw knife than I am," he answered. "But I'll take you up on the company." That night, they sat at the table sorting dried beans by lamplight, Talon asleep in the new cradle Rowan had carved with her initials burned into the base. The room smelled of pine and the faint sweetness of last summer's apples, still stored in straw in the corner. Kienna turned a pale kidney bean over in her hand. "You ever think about what you'd have done if I hadn't stepped off that train?" Rowan didn't look up. "I'd be patching fence lines alone and talking to the roan like he understood me," she laughed. "He does understand you, he just doesn't care." He smiled, soft and real. "Truth is, I'd still be waiting. I just wouldn't have known what for." Winter settled hard by November. The snow deepened in drifts against the barn and turned the fence lines into buried threads. They kept the stove going through the nights, and Rowan made a cradle attachment for the sled so Talon could ride warm when they went to check traps or carry feed. One morning, Kienna woke to the sound of Rowan singing low under his breath, a rhythm she didn't recognize, slow and steady, made more of hum than words. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the kitchen to find him bouncing Talon gently, his voice no more than a thread. "You've got a song?" she asked, smiling. He shrugged. "My ma used to hum it when the cold settled in. Figured he ought to hear it too." "I like it," she said. "You should teach it to me." He did later that evening, both of them wrapped close on the settee, Talon curled between them. His voice was rougher than hers, but hers was steadier. Together, they found the tune. By December, the ground was too hard for digging, and the cattle had moved to the lower pasture. Rowan built a bench for the porch, though they wouldn't use it until spring. Kienna began stitching a quilt from the scraps she'd kept from her old life cloth from a dress she'd worn on her 16th birthday, a scrap of curtain from her childhood room, even a corner of the shawl her mother had given her before she'd left. One night, Rowan found her holding it in her lap, her fingers still. "You all right?" he asked. She looked up. "These pieces. They're from a life I thought I'd never want to see again, but now they feel like part of something good." He knelt beside her, resting a hand on her knee. "You brought them with you for a reason. I thought I was running from everything, but maybe I was carrying the best parts without even knowing." He leaned in, kissed her just beneath the jaw, slow as the fire burning down behind them. "You can stop running now. You've built something here." "I didn't build it alone," she whispered. They didn't speak more that night. They didn't need to. The last snow came in March. It melted fast, leaving rivulets down the hill and softening the earth around the apple saplings. Kienna planted wildflowers along the fence line, and Rowan carved their wedding date into the porch beam with the same knife he used to shape Talon's toys. One morning, as spring rolled in with the scent of thawed pine and damp soil, Rowan stepped outside and called back in. "Come out here." Kienna joined him, Talon balanced on her hip, his cheeks pink with the breeze. Rowan pointed to the tree line. "See that?" A pair of bluebirds had made a nest in the crook of the shed's roof. Their wings caught the light as they darted in and out, gathering twigs and dried grass. "They're staying," he said. Kienna leaned into him. "So are we." Years passed, as years do. The fields turned golden again and again. Talon grew into his legs and into Rowan's shadow, learning the land by the same quiet steps. The wildflowers spread each spring, thickening along the fence until the pasture bloomed in blues and yellows. Kienna kept the quilt on their bed through every season. Rowan added a second cradle in time, and then a third, each one carved with care, each one filled with the kind of love that grew from silence and choosing and the long, steady work of staying. And in that cabin tucked beneath the Colorado hills, the life they built held fast. Not perfect, but whole. Not easy, but deeply true. Together, they endured everything time brought. And together, they were happy.